Welcome back. This is Gamer 1745 here. I'm going to continue my playing of Call of Duty 2. It's a fun game. It's a classic, which means it's old, but it also means it's good and it's worth playing. We'll see what we've completed the Russian campaign. We will go onwards. It's been a long time since I played this, because I played it first, Alamein. Played this first through this thing, then played lots of multiplayer and whatnot for a while. Okay, Alamein. That was the sort of high watermark of the North African campaign for the Germans. The sort of defensive, not last line by any means, but the furthest they had to retreat back for the British. Read a book, The History of Warfare, by Montgomery of Alamein. That is his title, of Alamein. He was, I think, a duke, created a duke because of that. And it was a history of warfare, so it really gave me an insight into Montgomery and the way he understood warfare. He was sort of the opposite of a cavalry general. He, not that he was flexible. It was nothing like inflexibility, but he was not a type of general that if the enemy's retreating, you always pursue him. There's that philosophy, and just and you don't necessarily pursue him hard, but you just stay at his heels and keep nipping at him to never give him comfortable position, even if you're incredibly weak. Just because if they're running away from you, just keep sort of shooting at them a little bit as they flee. He was very logistics minded, very wanted to be prepared, didn't want to go too far out on a limb. So he had been watching the back and forth of the desert campaign from a distance. When he was put in charge, he and there was already steps being done before he got there. He really secured the logistics, really got all that in order. The British had gotten they got these jock columns in which they were sort of like mobile tank groups, but they weren't combined arms formations like we think of, the Blitzkrieg with infantry, motorized infantry with some light artillery with tanks and everything like this. They were more just like tank units. So when they would run into prepared positions or other elements with particularly the Germans, they get chewed up pretty bad. And so the idea of sort of the dashing cavalry across the desert but he put a stop to all of that and really got it organized up. And Alamein is right there at the Quadra, probably butchering it, depression, sort of basically a swamp in the desert, if you will, impassable to drivable vehicles. All of the raids from the SAS, the Long Range Desert Group, and Popsky's private army were sort of going around the south of it, and even when they sort of kind of were in it, they had lots of trouble, and they're using extremely lightweight vehicles and that type of thing. And so it gave an anchor that you was functionally you couldn't outflank it to the south, and then obviously to the north you had the sea. So that sort of stopped the Germans, or Rommel in particular, in the ability to always turn the flank, and it concentrated the front enough so that the British were able to keep a dense enough amount of forces that Rommel couldn't punch through. I would say, generally speaking, the Italians, or the Germans and the Italians, however you want to put that, sent enough supplies and equipment, but particularly supplies to support the forces, sent enough to do the job in North Africa. But the problem is too many of the supplies were being intercepted. So it's like you need 1,000 tons, so we send you 1,000 tons, but if 1/3 of that is sunk at sea, you only have 600 plus tons of supply, so you don't have enough. And so that was sort of the problem with the situation. It wasn't that the Germans or the Italians or whatever you were say weren't sending enough supplies, and later it became more and more of a problem, but is that because of submarines, because of Ultra, the decoding, they were intercepting enough supplies. So the Germans, if it came down to the concentration situation and the British were able to concentrate at Alamein, they couldn't just keep pushing or keep turning the flank. So Rommel got there, got his forces, got as much supplies as he thought he could, and then pushed. In the beginning of the Alamein is a German offensive, but it runs into this fairly dense British forces that basically, more or less at the first time in any large numbers, had the Grant tanks, which had a 75 millimeter lower hull gun and a 37 millimeter upper gun, so that better than most of what the British had been having before. Wasn't great armor thickness, but still very effective, so it really improved the British tank capability. Plus, they had dug a lot of desert fortifications, trenches, and sown a huge amount of landmines in the desert in front of them, and also had stored up lots and lots of artillery shells in there. So when Rommel attacked, his attack was stopped, significant losses, and it was as much an Italian attack. I mean, Rommel was in charge, I believe, by that point. Because early on in the campaign, Rommel was just sort of in charge of himself, his the German African Corps, the Deutsches Afrika Korps, and it was overall Italian commanders that more and more, as time went on, became more of Rommel's show. But so that exhausted a lot of the Germans, and then at that point, because Montgomery is rather methodical, not that the Germans were completely beaten, but they didn't have the reserves there. A lot of their ammunition was, artillery and other supplies used up. It was only at that point did the British counterattack and start pushing, and the Afrika Korps retreated at that point. Had somebody like Patton been in charge of the British, Rommel would not have been able to get out any significant amount of his forces. It was purely Montgomery's view of, we move forward in sufficient force to deal with the enemy, we make sure we have enough supplies coming along, and all of that. It was the cautious commander idea. Not a bad commander, just a cautious commander. So they pushed it. So that allowed Rommel to get what he could out. And I think, to a point, the people, Patton enthusiasts and others might slam Montgomery for this. I know I'm talking a bunch here, but for this. But he also looked at it, it was a limited objective, and, where could Rommel and the Italians go? There was no population or industrial base for them to, go in and dig into, and the Navy was sinking a lot of the ships, and more British air power, backed up by American air power, was coming into theater, because also at the time of Alamein, that's when the torch landings were happening against the French. So but that was way up away. And so he saw that as, I think we don't need to pursue them because they're running, but they have nowhere to hide. Well, what happens again, my contention is had the Germans and the Italians, because mostly Italian ships, they had the shipping, they had the ability to send more supply. They just didn't, because the Deutsches Afrika Korps becomes Panzer Army Africa in Tunisia when finally, now there's a problem, so they really send in forces in Tunisia. Now it's too late, because the Americans and the British are coming from the west in large numbers, and the British that had built up their forces are coming from the east, and so they were able to supply, at least for a while, all those reinforcements that were primary. Well, a fair amount of Italians were also, Italian units sent too, but a lot of German units sent into North Africa there. So we'll see what other sort of British stuff, so I can talk about later parts of that campaign. But because of Montgomery's delays, it allowed the significant reinforcements of the Germans. Now that might not be a bad thing. And we can talk about more about that later, but we'll get back to playing shoot 'em up here.
(1941). The Desert Fox, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, arrives in Libya to assume command of the Afrika Korps. Within a few months, Rommel, the rising star of the German army, recaptures the territory taken by the British Commonwealth forces prior to his arrival. Despite being heavily outnumbered by the British forces, the superior range and armor of the German tanks allows the Afrika Korps to take the fight to the Allies. By July of 1942, the Desert Fox and his unstoppable Afrika Korps, in a series of classic blitzkrieg attacks, pushes the British forces eastward across the deserts of Libya and into Egypt. Now in late 1942, holding their ground a mere 60 miles from the Egyptian capital of Cairo, British Field Marshal Montgomery's forces, including the Desert Rats of the 7th Armored Division, prepare to blunt the German offensive and regain the initiative.
Queen 6, this is King 6. Enemy tanks sighted leaving the depot. We're commencing our attack. Out. This is it, boys. Our decoys should keep those panzers busy while we wipe out their supplies. Let's go!
Jerry's! They're the sandbags! On our left flank!
This is a Thompson submachine gun. Combination of the word Thompson and the Americans encountering the Brits usually started calling it the Tommy gun. There's one little problem with this Tommy gun. This is an American style Tommy gun. Well, they were all made in America, but the ones the British were given up were of the style that would take the drum magazine. This was the American War production version of the gun.
Are secure!
One of the British used to. No, I shouldn't have been surprised at that.
That's one less Terry to worry about!
Let's throw a smoke grenade.
Man down!
This is in long range.
Stay close to me! Open fire!
shockingly excellent move. There's some limited skill. Good skill at this game. It's some limited skill.
Sergeant, cover! Find some cover!
Das macht es uns
Who
beiden
just shot
leichter!
me? Keep down, keep down.
Beschießt diese Ziele! Er wurde getroffen! Look out! Grenade!
I got both of you guys. Come on. I should have thought I got both of you guys.
Come on, Davis! We've got to link up with Price and McGregor!
Thompson, follow me! Mit mir kommen! Sanitäter! Neben diesen Potato Masher
Second squad, move in! Let's give Sergeant Davis and his boys some covering fire! German troops! Near the sandbags! On the right! Women!
Germans! On the side of the sandbags! Price! It's an MG-42! On the right!
Davis! Good to see you again!
Einer zu Misch! Die Engländer! Eine Bunker Guys! Einer Bunker! On the right!
Wow, they just got me.
Länder! Eine Bunker!
Davis! Take out their ammunition and fuel stockpile!
Ground infantry! Over by the lorry! To the northeast! Männerboden! Britische Infanterie! Bei den Bunker da! Auf dem Bildungsstockpile! Lads! Near those boxes! To the east!
Or I should have made sure I could get out before it blew it.
Over by that lorry!
Okay.
Bunker da! Tötet den
That is,
Jerry's! Over by that stairs! Auf der anderen Seite! Listen! Troops! By that bunker! Over to the east! Sanitäter!
me, Dane!
Well, it's good that you're keeping your heads down, because I'm liable to shoot you in this chaos and confusion.
Seal these bunkers, Davis!
I know one out there is like landmines get blown up. Gotta somehow keep you within bounds. Supposed to go and blow up next. Fuel? That wasn't smart. See, that wasn't smart. You blow up the fuel at point blank range. Yeah, I know.
Get that bunker door open now! Yes, sir!
Check the bunker for enemy intelligence.
We don't have time to collect a lot of stupid maps!
Shut it, I said keep your bloody mouth shut, private.
Enemy down! Sanitäter!
Yeah, I got in too far. I should have thrown in a grenade there.
Mann am Boden!
Wish I could have thrown a grenade in. Yeah, you got one, and I'm getting hit by a lot of them. Short burst, Andrew, short burst. Not one they got. Killed the guy over here.
Man am Boden!
There's an endless number. There's somebody behind me.
Adams!
Intel. Grenade off the dead.
Let's go!
We're nearly back in the town, sir. Jerry tanks have been spotted advancing on our positions to the east.
Looks like we're in for a bloody hard fight, lads. Get us back quickly, Private.
Yes, sir.
Davis, McGregor, get in the Bren carrier. Move! We're finished here.
Okay, we're gonna end the session here. Thanks for viewing. Hope it was exciting for you. H.G. Wells, if we don't end wars, wars will end us. He was a nut job. Trust me, he was a nut job. If you look at some of his stuff, Herbert George Wells, we know him from The Time Machine and some other stuff, but he believed that war was going to end mankind and all this other stuff. Like I say, he was a nut job. He wanted one world government. He wasn't an evil guy like Hitler, but he wanted to control everybody's lives. Another one of these types. I'm a freedom guy. I like freedom. I want freedom as a very high value. It comes with costs. But I'm a freedom sort of guy, so that's some of my viewpoints. Thanks. We'll be back.